question who's listening in so we can just make sure that it works. Just type something in and just say, hey, my name's Jim or something. Anyway, keep going.
There we go. So I just want to kind of give you an idea, too, of how I see this comparing before we get started. So, as I said, I attended the Candidate Experience Awards in Fort Worth, Texas this year. If you weren't there, I will tell you it was a great program. Didn't know what to expect. Saw Heath as a keynote, walked in late because I'm typically late.
Right.
And what was interesting is, I went in thinking about a lot of the things that we've talked about this year, and you can see on our screen. So the topics of concerns: employee brand within human resources and employee brand in general, transparency in the workforce, contractors versus employees, the candidate full-on experience. So as I'm listening to Heath, who by his own admission will tell you, is not in talent acquisition, is not in HR, and did not know about any of these topics or how important they were for us. I think Elaine asked you to speak at the Candidate Experience Awards because she saw you on CNN. Is that how you guys got to know? Yeah. And she said, boy, there's some really good pieces in here. So when I talked to Elaine afterwards, she said, wow, it was amazing because this is what we saw. Here's what we heard from Heath. He talked about employee brand. He talked about transparency. He talked about contractors versus employment, the candidate experience, and a lot more than that. In fact, I couldn't keep up the writing because I wanted to pay attention. So Jess is going to help me, and we're going to pay close attention today. I do want to tell you that Heath is quickly becoming a celebrity. He just finished meeting with People Magazine. So we're lucky to have you here today, Heath. Thank you.
They're just interested in my RV.
Yeah. So let's take this advantage of this opportunity with Heath, because I think in a month or two, we're not even going to be able to get a hold of you, Heath. You're such a popular guy these days. So we want to hear what you have to say and your questions. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Heath and get us started.
Cool. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Awesome. All right, so gosh, it's so funny doing a webinar because I feel like it's a one-way glass. You're looking at me, but I'm just looking at my computer, so it's just funny, technology. Anyway, I'm pumped to talk about this with you guys today, and thanks, Christine, for having me. And so I'll get right into it. Kind of the high-end overview is over the past year, my wife and I have traveled all over America, and we've been filming a documentary called Hourly America. Let me go back. And this whole trip was really just kind of my journey of figuring out what the heck I wanted to do with my life. I graduated from college a few years ago, and I went right into software sales in a local startup here in Austin, which is where I am right now, and basically did that for a little while and got pretty bored. I was doing it and thinking, I want to rise up and maybe start my own company one day and things like that, but it just wasn't working out how I anticipated. I didn't like sitting behind a desk, and it's not that it was anything inherently bad, it just wasn't for me. I wanted to go out and explore new types of jobs, and I just felt like I wanted to get more experience. And so I was really open to different options and different routes of getting there. And I'm just that I was thinking about, what do I want in a job that I'm going to go get? I started thinking about the things that I look for in my work, and I think it's the same thing as a lot of millennials. I want meaning, recognition, respect, and preferably a six-figure income that allows me to work on the beach somewhere with my laptop. And so I think that's kind of the dream, right? Just to be able to go work on the beach. And I think it's pretty unrealistic because you probably get sand in your laptop and stuff. But anyway, I'm kind of trying to figure out what it is I want. And so my wife and I was my fiance at the time, and we're kind of figuring out where are we going to go from here. And we kind of had this light bulb moment go off where we said, you know what, we're going to go travel around the country. We're going to quit our jobs before our wedding, and we're basically going to go see America. I read this stat once that said that 78.5% of young people or millennials believe that you can solve all of life's problems with a road trip. And I think that I had read that quote or something because I probably believed that at the time. And so anyway, for whatever reason, we decided that we were going to go buy an RV and travel across the country. And we even decided that we were going to go to all 50 states. And it was something we had wanted to do in college. I came up with a bucket list of things I wanted to accomplish basically before I die. And on that bucket list, I wanted to film a documentary over something I was passionate about. And I also wanted to travel to all 50 states. And I thought this was something that would take years and years to go out and accomplish. But I was meeting up with a mentor and kind of brainstorming, how do I go about this process of finding work that is meaningful to me and find work that I enjoy. And I had a mentor throw out the idea. He said, you're about to leave your work and you're going to go travel to every state. You got to figure out, first of all, how to make money and things like that. And something he threw out there was, why don't you work a job in every state? And I thought about it for a minute. I said, that sounds awesome. Like, how cool would that be to go out and try anything that I wanted to do? And I called my wife immediately and told her how awesome this plan was, and she thought it was stupid and just ridiculous. But I said, whatever, you know, I'm gonna try this out, because something else that somebody told me was, your 20s are kind of like throwing wet spaghetti noodles at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I love that, mostly because I suck at cooking. But anyway, I love the idea of just trying new things, kind of this reverse method for figuring out what you wanted to do with your life. Knock out, hey, one job, see what you like, and then kind of move on to something new. So it's kind of like you're test driving different careers. And so even though my wife thought it was a dumb idea, I decided that I was going to give it a shot anyway, and that I was going to try to basically go out and try to get a job in every state. And so the first thing I did was I hopped on Google and I typed in jobs in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That was going to be our first stop on our trip. And what came up was an online job board called Snag a Job. And if you've never heard of them, you're in the HR industry, you probably have. They're basically an online job board for hourly paid jobs. So Domino's, Starbucks, if you want any job paid by the hour, you go to Snag a Job. They're one of the websites that do that. And so I found their website, and I was scrolling through all these job listings for Albuquerque, and I started realizing, oh crap, I'm going to have to find a job in every state. This is kind of nuts. And I had an idea, and so I reached out to their head of marketing on LinkedIn and just shot this guy a cold email. And basically poured to this guy. I was just like, you know what? I'm 23. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing with my life. And I got this idea to go out and travel across the country and work a job in every state. And I sent this out there not thinking that he would get back to me or I'd ever hear from them. But I got a phone call 10 minutes later from their head of PR. His name is John. And apparently John was he was freaking out. Like, he had been apparently trying to find somebody to go out in like a wrapped bus or a van, like an intern or something, and go work jobs across the country. I cannot make this stuff up. And he was so excited to talk to me. And I'm still in my old job at this point. I'm like hiding in this little cubby, trying to tell people, trying to like make it sound all legit what I'm doing. And he said, send me some references. Let's talk in a few days. And so a few days later, I ended up jumping on a plane to fly up to Richmond, Virginia, to meet the team at Snag Job, give them my vision for this idea of traveling across the country and working different jobs. And I told them I wanted to call it Hourly America, and I wanted to work a job in every state. Basically anything that I wanted to do, just go out and try it and see what all was out there. And something I've always enjoyed doing was actually getting to know people. So if I went to Starbucks, asking that person, how'd you get this job? What do you like about it? Just enjoy having that conversation with people. And so I shared this whole vision for this project, and they liked it. He said, Heath, we want to help you find 30% of your jobs leveraging our job board connections. And then we also want to help sponsor you guys, so help pay your gas and some of your food. I said, great, we could use the money. And another thing he threw out there was, how would you feel about us sending you some really nice film equipment and you turn in this project into a documentary film? It's yours, you own it, whatever. And looking at my bucket list, I said, this is something I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to make a film over something really cool, so here's my opportunity to do that. So I called my wife and basically told her, hey, we got this opportunity to make a documentary of our trip. We got a sponsor. And also, how would you feel about turning this into a documentary project? And she said, you've always wanted to do this. You have to say yes. And I said, well, that's cool, but you have to be the one who actually films me working at every job. And she thought about it, and she said, let's do it. And so she ended up being the videographer. And so the morning of our wedding, like a month later, we basically became filmmakers, and we got a couple cameras in that day, and then started coordinating our trip. And so 4 days after the wedding, we hit the road and started taking off. So that's a little camera. So now I'm a filmmaker. Yep. And so this is our RV. We bought a 20-year-old RV off Craigslist to travel around the country and did some renovations on it. And this picture on the far left is actually the first time that my wife drove our RV. And it's kind of hard to see. It's a little blurry, but I was pretty much terrified in this picture. We were out in the middle of nowhere in West Texas, and she got behind the wheel, immediately drove up behind one of those double-wide mobile homes, and I was freaking out but trying to be supportive at the same time. And we finally passed it, and I threw the GoPro on the dashboard, and I took a picture. And even though I was faking it in this moment, I really did have pretty much every reason to be terrified. I had no idea if we were going to have enough money to finish this trip, if I was going to be able to find enough jobs. I didn't know if the 21-year-old RV was going to make it, and hopefully my relationship made it as well. And so I did end up finding my first job in Albuquerque. It was at a little martial arts dojo. I got literally kicked around by 8-year-old kids that day. But something that I realized right off the bat was I knew that my perspective going into this, it was going to be different than any regular 23-year-old person looking for a job, right? You know, like we had a corporate sponsor, we were filming a documentary, and we were also, I had questionable skills, and I was only going to be working at these jobs for one day. And so my whole thought was to be able to go into this and work a job for a day, try to learn as much as I can within that one day parameter, and then I would interview the person that I worked with throughout the day. If they were young, I'd ask them, what do you want to do in your work? And if they were older, I'd ask them what they had learned, and basically how did they find meaning in their job, whatever it was. And so these were all going to be hourly jobs. And so knowing that I was going to have this different experience, I still wanted to try to figure out how I try to genuinely learn everything that I could at each job, whether it was an electrician. In California, I worked for the Los Angeles Angels minor league team, cleaning crew. And with each job, I started learning more and more skills, and it was really cool. In Seattle, I worked for Domino's, delivering pizzas, met some really cool people there. And something I started realizing around this time was I had worked 10 or 11 jobs, and I basically started figuring out what type of companies appealed to me and how I would reach out to them. And so what I mean by that is the first few jobs, Snag a Job actually leveraged their connections and helped me get them. And after that, I started having to reach out and cold call and email some of these companies on my own. So I started realizing the process that I'd have to go through to find these jobs. So what companies would be likely to hire me on a one-day notice to come in, hey, I'm a random filmmaker guy coming in, can I work at your business? It's a big question. So I had to figure out what companies worked for me. And the first thing I would do is I'd hop on Google and I'd type in businesses in Missoula, Montana. You know, for instance, we went there. And I would immediately look at their reviews, Glassdoor, Google, Facebook, whatever. And our philosophy was if they have good reviews, they have good people, great service, and they'll probably make for a really good day of work and good interviews. And that pretty much held up throughout most of our trip. And the other thing I would do is I would get on their website, and I would just spend a few seconds on there because you could immediately tell if I got on their website and it's just like this corporate-looking thing that looks like it puked up stock photos and Siri, like you voiced it in a Siri to create like the content and the text that was on this website, I would just keep going because in my mind, that wasn't going to be a business that was flexible enough and agile enough for a company to bring me in on short days' notice. And the other thing I would look at is their social media. I would look for people basically having fun. So I'd get on their Facebook and I'd see like, hey, how are they interacting and engaging with their fans? Are they responding to comments? All of those little things. I know those probably aren't things that a lot of or all people look at when they're applying for jobs, but those are things that were really important to me in this process because I realized if I go through this criteria, I'm more than likely, first of all, not going to have to work as hard to find a job because these are the companies that are likely to hire me and want to have me come and do this project at their business. And so that was kind of the process that I went through to start looking for these jobs. It wasn't really anything intentional that I like researched. It's just kind of the process that I started going through. And somebody shared some research with me actually a couple days ago, and it was that if somebody is about to apply for a job at a company, they'll look through 15 different resources on Google before they actually say yes to that job. Obviously, there's extenuating circumstances if they need the job, but 15 different pages on Google, you know, go to Google, type in working at X company, Chick-fil-A, Whataburger, Starbucks, whatever, and they look at all those references. So I was kind of doing the same thing unknowingly. And then we made our way across the Midwest. Not too much happened there. We got struck by lightning in South Dakota. And even though I started finding these companies that resonated with me, I definitely did get a lot of no's, especially in the Midwest. I could not find a good job in Iowa. I ended up working at a biker bar. But in Ohio, in particular, one morning, I got 4 no's before 9:30 in the morning. And it was one of those moments where we had been on the road for a few months. And basically, if you've ever been rejected multiple times in a row, it really sucks. Like, especially, you know, guys can probably understand this better than women because we get rejected a lot by girls. But basically, it was 9:30. I got rejected 4 no's for jobs, and I was kind of starting to think about what am I doing here, and why am I on this trip? Is it meaningful to anybody except for myself, or am I just wasting my time? And I got on the phone again. I made a call to the Cleveland Indians organization, and I called them and said, hey, I would love to be a bat boy. I thought that would be cool. I played college ball. Can I come be the bat boy at your game tonight? I got a hold of the HR manager for them, And she got on the phone, and the first thing she said was, I love what you're doing, but we are already committed. They had already committed to a local charity within Cleveland that night to come out and be the bat boy and girl for their game. So she said, it's not going to work for tonight. And I said, you know what, that's totally fine. Well, how about, throwing peanuts? That would be awesome to be able to like go and throw peanuts at people. I'd be good at that. And she said, no, we have to actually have some training. But what about coming back next week? Because, we have another home series, and so you can come back and maybe be a bat boy then. And I said, I would love to, but we're going to be traveling, so I can't do that. And we kind of just went back and forth trying to come up with different solutions. And before we got off the phone, she ended up rejecting me, saying no, basically. But before we got off the phone, she said, here's some restaurants and bars in town that would be really cool for you to go work at. And when I got off the phone, I felt way different than I had the rest of that morning, and really all throughout our entire trip when I had gotten rejected, because she did something different than every other company that had told me no. Every other company that had reached out to that said no either said no and just left it at that, or they actually just didn't say anything at all. And so what she did differently was she gave me a why. She told me why that she couldn't meet my request, which was because they'd already committed to somebody, totally fine. It let me know that she wasn't rejecting me, just my offer. She gave me a concession, which meant that she basically offered me something less than what I was asking for. She's saying, hey, come back next week. And then she also gave me an alternative. You can't work here, but go look at these bars and stuff. And so to me, this was a huge learning experience, because of what it made me realize was that all those other companies that I had went and looked at a job for or reached out to had all missed out on an opportunity to turn me into their fan. And now I'm talking about the Cleveland Indians organization and this specific HR manager, because she took enough time to actually care about me. And it made me think about companies. There's companies out there, I'm sure, that hire thousands and thousands of people every year, or have thousands and thousands of people apply for these jobs, and they kind of, from an outsider's perspective, almost treat them, from my own experience, like they're a burden. Like, well, we have so many people applying for jobs. Well, to me, this is a great lesson in what it looks like to reject somebody and actually keep them around as a fan. And so kind of the key learning at this job was that she didn't reject me, just my offer. And I did end up getting a job at a little underground bar called what are those things called? The prohibition bars. Speakeasies. Yeah, they're kind of like hidden bars. So anyway, we got back on the road and we headed up to Maine, where I got my next job at a place called Bob's Clam Hut. And this was one of my favorite jobs, because at this point I had worked almost 30 jobs, and I could basically walk into a business and kind of get a solid idea of how the day was going to go just by the first 5 minutes. And I know that sounds crazy, but when you've worked 30 jobs in such a short period of time, you get a feeling for how the manager's treating you, how the people are immediately reacting to you, and you just kind of get a feeling for how the day's going to go. And I walked in, and the whole team was immediately like standing in this big circle in the back room, and they were going over the day's agenda. They did every day, and they also said, hey, here's what we did in sales a year ago. I kind of give people an expectation for how the day was going to go, how busy it was going to be. And something I immediately noticed was that whenever they went around the room, they introduced themselves to us, and they said, hey, my name's Justin. I've been here 5 years. And I've been here 7 years, and somebody else was 9, and the longest was 13 years. And this was a quick service restaurant. And so I immediately started thinking, wow, these people have been in this job quite a long time for a quick service in an industry that turnover is usually pretty high. And so I immediately thought, maybe there's something going on here. This is pretty cool. And so the whole team said, go Bob. It was like a football team, and broke and went out to their stations, and we kind of rotated throughout the day. So the first part of the day, this picture of me on the left, I was actually mixing like their secret sauce. I have no idea what was in there. I actually didn't eat any of it. But the next part of the day, I was like on the fish fryer and getting popped by grease. But I was having fun, and a lot of the other employees were just laughing, having a good time. They were all cool. So it was like the day was going really well. And then I get up to the cashier, and this picture on the right of me with this guy named Justin. And we get up there, and he says, this is my favorite position to work. And he said, you can understand the cash register. You can get to know all that pretty easy. But up here, it's like being on a stage. And he said, you can be whoever you want to be. These people drive from all over the country and all over the state to come here to Bob's. They've been on diners, drives, and dives, and they just are a local staple in Kittery, Maine. And I started to understand what he was talking about as he started having customers come up, and the way he interacted with them. He was giving me tips on just how to talk to them. And then this lady came up. She ordered clams. She said, I drove here from 3 hours away, and you guys are some of my favorite places in all of Maine to get clams. And he laughed and said, we always love hearing that, but I'm just curious, why aren't we your #1 favorite place to get clams in all of Maine? And she laughed because she thought he was joking. Like, why would you ask a question like that? And then he said, no, like, I'm serious. Why aren't we your number one? And they went back and forth and started having this bantering in a respectful way. But why wasn't Bob's the number one place to get clams in all of Maine? And he was serious. And I personally had never seen an employee that actually cared so much about whether or not their food was number one and not number two. Most people would be happy about that. And I'm just sitting there watching this, and people are going around us, and this conversation had to have lasted like 10 minutes. At least it felt like that long. And then the lady asked for his name, and he asked for her name. And it was really fun. And after she left, I looked at him and said, dude, that was awesome. I mean, what made you do that? And he said, honestly, I really believe in what it is we're doing here. And I said, okay, like, that's awesome. And I started really thinking about that. And later that day, I got to meet Michael, who owns it. And then I better understood what Justin was talking about. Michael, who bought Bob's from Bob and his wife quite a while back, he said that when he bought the restaurant, he had actually been exploring and discovering different hut restaurants in Maine for a very long time. And what he said was that he was kind of the Yelp before Yelp was a thing. He would like put the reviews of his personal opinion of all these restaurants on the side of the board. And so what I started getting from that was that there was this inherent sense of pride in his owning Bob's. He said when he bought it, he said, I hope I don't screw this up. And what I felt like was that belief and that purpose transcended into employees like Justin, because he could tell that the guy who owned the restaurant cared enough to be proud of it and to always want to improve and always want to be better. And I feel like there's so much of a difference in working for an owner in a business like that versus somebody who just says, yeah, this is what we do. It's kind of but we kind of believe in it. And so I feel like there was a huge difference there. And a couple other things they did different was they do profit sharing for their employees. So quarterly, based on how well the company does, you'll get bonuses. And so to me, there was this sense of almost ownership in that aspect. And it's something they actually talk about. I heard them speak on it several times just in passing. Another thing they do is each employee gets to pick a different charity. And so instead of them getting tips, all the customers donate to a charity. And once they hit $500, you actually pick another charity, so another employee gets to pick their favorite charity. So there's this sense of I'm doing something bigger here. And after I left Bob's, we started headed south. I incorporated something, I added something basically to my list of criteria that I looked for in companies. And what it was I looked for companies that had a bigger mission. So in addition to looking for things like social media, their online presence, and also their reviews and things like that, I would also look for companies that were trying to do something bigger. So even if they were selling clams, what was their mission beyond that? What were they trying to do to make an impact in the world? And so these are things that I was able to add to kind of my list of criteria. And so we finally, this is the last job that I'm going to talk about, but we made it down south and before the snow, because RVs can't get snow in them. They're not really made for that. And I made it down south, and I worked at a place called New Scooters for Less in Gainesville, Florida. And this is a job that I've talked about more than any of them, because the way I found this job was different than all of them. Up until this point, I had to reach out to 5 or 6 companies for every place that we actually stopped at, because you have to reach out to a certain number of people before you get hired. It's basic sales. But this is actually the only place where I reach out to one company. And it was because when I got on their website, they had their 12 core values listed out. The first one was something called we provide the UCE, the ultimate customer experience. I said, oh, that sounds neat. And then their number 12 value said, if you're late, bring donuts. And I was like, heck yes, I'm working at this place. And so that was kind of my mindset. And so I reached out to them, and I included, talked about their values, and I knew that I felt like they would resonate with what we were doing as well, and they did. They hired me, and so the next morning we showed up late because our RV doesn't go over 50 miles an hour, and we brought donuts, and it was a good way to start the day. But Colin, the owner, this guy in the bottom picture, she seemed like this guy doing this with the big red scarf. He's the owner, and he walked me to the back where his team was waiting in a line for us when we got there. And when I walked to the back, he had a table filled with coffee and pastries and orange juice and more donuts. And he walked up and handed me a shirt that had my name embroidered on it, and it was a mechanic shirt for the day. And he had less than 24 hours to do all of this. And my first thought was, this guy must really like documentaries and want to look good in our film, right? Because we're making a film, he wants to look good in it. It makes total sense. But then I started thinking about it, and throughout the day, when I interviewed Colin, I realized that my first impression was wrong. He may or may not like documentaries. That's irrelevant. But something he does that's different is he does this thing called the UC, the Ultimate Customer Experience. And this is where when somebody buys a new scooter from Colin, he doesn't just ring them up and send them on their way. he actually gathers all of his team, brings them to the back of the back room. They sign a balloon. He walks out yelling through a megaphone, and they do a handwritten note and like a bunch of swag that they hide under the seat of the scooter, and then they all go outside and take this Polaroid picture in front of the customers in their scooter. And he calls this the ultimate customer experience. And just when they think it's over, this little balloon pops out. And as a result, Colin's been basically turned Gainesville, Florida into the scooter capital of the world. I mean, if you ever visit Gainesville, you'll see hundreds, if not thousands, of scooters everywhere. And a lot of them have his little NSL4L, New Scooters for Less, tag on there. So this made me think. I prepared this presentation a month ago for the first time for a group of hiring leaders from different Fortune 500 companies, like Christine mentioned. And this had me thinking, what would it look like if companies created the ultimate hiring experience? And basically what that would look like is create an experience that's so powerful that you have people talk about it. And my kind of the enemy that I feel like the enemy of doing this would be trying to figure out different ways to automate it instead of different ways to customize it. So for Colin, it doesn't make sense for him to bring 15 or 16 people off his hourly clock for the day and go outside and basically, waste precious time where they're supposed to be working to take a picture. It doesn't make financial sense. But as a result, he's created this experience that people talk about. And you could say, sure, it's a small business, but there's also this thing that the Harvard Business Review put out called the signature experience. It was just kind of similar. I just found out about this last week, but basically companies like the Container Store and several other companies do this as well. They have this experience that for the Container Store, it's extremely competitive to actually get a job there, and people talk about it. And somebody actually recommended this to me last week. They said, I want to get a job at the Container Store. And so something that I would like to leave you guys with, whoever's watching this right now, would be, what would it look like to spend less time automating the process and more time trying to customize this experience? I think that's huge because it makes so much sense to figure out ways that we can streamline tons of applicants hiring for jobs. Totally, it makes sense. But what it also does is it makes the process pretty crappy. I mean, just to be honest, that's exactly what it does. It makes the experience not stand out. Nobody talks about it. Nobody tells anybody about an average experience. Because the truth is, I mean, we're living in 2015, and right now, every person who's applying for a job, every person who is currently working at a company is going to be broadcasting their life. So job seekers, job applicants, people, current employees, they all have a cell phone. Everyone's going to be telling their story, whether or not a company is empowering people to do that. And so what I'd like to say is, everyone is broadcasting their life right now, and what are people going to say about you? That would be kind of the question that I'd like to leave you with today. If you're kind of talking or having a conversation about this, is what are people going to say about your company, and what kind of experience are you providing for them? So appreciate you guys listening to this presentation, and I'll hand it back over to you, Christine.
Unpause me. Oh, go ahead. And we're back. So we have some questions, that's for sure. But this is the second time that I've seen Heath's presentation, and I've got to tell you, I just pick up more and more the whole time. What was interesting on this webinar too, Heath, is that we were gaining more and more. I think that people were telling people as you were speaking, which is interesting, because these are messages, like I said in the beginning, that we've talked about. The candidate experience is important. The transparency, as we call it in the workplace, especially when you're talking about, you immediately went to Glassdoor. You mentioned, who else was it besides Glassdoor you said you went to?
Google, Facebook,
to see what people were saying. I mean, let me ask you a question on that, because shout out to Will Marzillo. I think he's on too. Will and I did a presentation, and we're going to do a follow-up in the first quarter of next year about transparency in the workforce and how companies like Glassdoor, which is really created from Yelp, right? I think it was Yelp, grade your company. And there's other sites out there like Rate My Boss. So how literally did you take those comments? I mean, but go ahead. I don't want to. By the way, I've not prompted any of the responses or any of the things that he says. Really, I didn't coach him or anything. So I just want to hear it raw from you.
Yeah, I would say there's always going to be jerks. I think that's like did you say something else?
No, I'm listening.
Okay. I was gonna say I think there's always gonna be the trolls, people who just want to get on Google reviews and say something terrible. The philosophy that I kind of take on it is that where there's smoke, there's fire. You know, if you get on Glassdoor or Google and there's just tons of comments and tons of things that are pretty bad, then I would take that into huge consideration. And the other thing I would do on top of that is I wouldn't just look at Google reviews or Glassdoor. I would type in, what's it like to work at People Science with Christine? And I would look at different articles that people wrote, because if it's a big enough company, then there's the articles out there on what it's like working in that company. And so those are all things I would take into consideration.
So how much of you doing that was because you wanted to see how you would do at the company, or do you think was part of like your exploration and for the movie kind of thing?
What I mentioned about trying to find good people for interviews was really I would say that, and just wanting to have a good experience at a company, like why would you want to go work somewhere that has bad reviews? That's going to be not a great experience. I mean, if I was trying to do a documentary on how not to run a business, maybe I would try to go work at companies that have bad reviews, but I'm trying to go have people share with me their story and how they find meaning in their work and things like that. Like I want to talk to companies that I feel like have good people, and so I feel like that's how you get good reviews.
So one of the things that you didn't touch, I'm combining some people's questions too, by the way, and Jess is things over to me at the same time. But one of the things that you didn't elaborate too much on, although you hit the nail on the head, was technology. And because I haven't prompted you, I will tell you that technology is huge right now in HR. In fact, the VC dollars going to technology is crazy. We actually have a software coming out too, so thanks for bashing it. But no, you're exactly right. Technology should enable us to be better at what we are, right? Can you talk about, as a candidate, in total disclosure, what you felt about the applicant tracking systems and the ways that you had to apply?
I do feel like a lot of them were impersonal. Something I would love to see on more applicant, like people reaching out. And so there's something that is on websites like Odesk and freelance.com and Fiverr, which is basically, and I think even on Airbnb, which is the response rate and average time that they get back to you. And to me, I feel like that should be incorporated into
Yep, froze up.
How long?
Can you say that again, Heath? You froze up for a second. You were talking about response.
Yeah, what I was going to say.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so like websites like Airbnb times an average response rate for people who are trying to stay at that business or that house. I feel like reaching out to apply for jobs sometimes feels like you're sending your resume or your email into like a cold, dark abyss, and nobody's ever going to see it. So if I were able to look at a company who I was applying to a job for and see, hey, they usually get back to you in 2 to 5 business days or 1 to 3 weeks, and the average response rate is 97%, the chance of me reaching out to that company is pretty high, because I know that they're probably going to get back to me. If I just feel like I'm sending this out to nobody, then it's just not encouraging to want to do that. So I would love to see more transparency, exactly like what you said. What's the average amount of response rates that you're sending out to people who apply for jobs? I think that would be fantastic.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's almost as simple as putting in your template. Right. We typically respond to you, and then you've got a commitment.
Yeah, exactly.
So many really great learnings. There was my question about that. So what are the 3 biggest takeaways you have for job seekers too? I know you had a post that went out the other day. If you don't follow Heath, follow Heath. And it was, what was again? The reverse job search, right?
A reverse method for figuring out what you want to do with your life.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a really good blog, article, whatever you want to call it. But if we looked at it from that perspective, what do you think the 3 biggest things you would say to talent acquisition people or people in human resources as a result of your trip?
So not applied to job seekers or people in that industry? Yeah, I'm sorry, a little bit confusing, but in other words, so you go ahead and talk about your reverse job search first, and then I'll kind of show you what I mean from there. How's that? Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so the reverse method for figuring out what you want to do with your life is basically exactly what I did. I've always had this mentality that it's okay if I don't like something new as long as I try it. And so when I was working in sales, I said, okay, I'm okay with going out and trying 50 different jobs, because to me that's one step closer, process of elimination, if you will, figuring out things I do want to do with my life. And so I didn't get paid for any of these jobs that I went in there and worked for the day. And so to me, this was a way of basically bringing back my own style of apprenticeship, because I feel like a lot of college graduates get into jobs that they hate because they never actually tried them. And so I feel like it's pretty practical, and I would love to see companies encourage that too. You know, like come and try it and work here for a day or so and see if you like it. Because if not, you're really doing us a favor if you try something and don't like it.
So that kind of starts to lead into one of the questions we have here is where does the contractor versus the direct employee information come in? And I know when I saw you the first time and then catching this is the independence of thinking. I think there's a lot of controversy. I mean, Uber has really kind of brought this to the forefront, but there's been a lot of legislation and a lot of legal battles around what is a contractor compared to an independent contractor. And I think we're facing, even in the upcoming presidential election, a huge disparity on one side of the house saying, one side of our democracy saying, we need to compensate people higher. We need to beef up the laws as far as what's an independent contractor. And then we've got the other side of the house saying, no, we don't. We need to keep it in the best interest of the companies. As a talent acquisition person, I can tell you, and I think anybody, especially our friends from Silicon Valley, people like Danielle from RMS that we're going to be talking to, there's a lot of people that enjoy independence like you do. Mm-hmm. So the messaging that I was picking up, and maybe you could speak a little bit to that, is, would you consider being a freelancer? How important do you think it is to have one company that you work for that is responsible for making sure you have your health care, responsible for making sure that you have long-term employment? In your world, how important is that?
In general, I think it's huge. I mean, it's a pain in the butt trying to figure out insurance as a freelancer right now. It's just like, it's a huge stress, to be honest. And so I think it comes down to, first of all, totally not being qualified to talk about this, but I'll do it anyway. I think that some people want that security and they need it, and other people crave more freedom and entrepreneurial drive in their work, and that's totally okay, and I think we're just built differently. And so I think it really is, it's more about what do you need as an individual employee. Do you need stability? Do you need all of those things? Do you need direction? Or do you kind of thrive in an environment that is built around, hey, we're not going to give you a roadmap. You've got to figure this out on your own. So I think that's part of it. The other part of it is I feel like it's very new in what we're doing right now, and the whole contractor and not going to work at companies full time. I mean, Google, they do like a 1-year probationary type thing for a lot of their employees, where like the first year at Google, it's really your contractor, you're not an employee, and then you go through a whole nother round of interviews to actually get a job at Google. And it's like you are supposed to almost be looking for other jobs during that time, because there's no guarantee that they're going to hire you. And so I don't know what that looks like. Somebody's calling this office. It's not even mine. Anyway, so yeah, I'm not sure what that looks like.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, your viewpoint is you want to be that, you in particular, because obviously if anybody hasn't told you, you don't know it, a bit of an entrepreneur, right? So you want to have that spirit, but you do like the big company behind you if you can find it.
I think if it was the right one, then maybe, But right now, I definitely enjoy the freedom and flexibility. Those are huge values of mine, to be able to travel around and do some speaking, do different creative projects, and I think I'm being rewarded with that. We finished our trip, we started doing video work, and it's kind of a high-end thing, and so we've been able to be rewarded by being freelancers and contractors. So.
Exactly. So I think that's one of the things that we see struggling, right? Our economy in general, our government, in the way that we operate in business, is people want a lot of freedoms, and what kind of companies are we going to be in the end? Obviously, combinations right now of freelancers, contractors, and internal employees, and how is that going to pan out? Used to be easier to make those predictions, but I think you hit some nails on the head. Jess, you've got tons of questions besides those that I have, so here we go.
I have one question for you. Someone's asked, are you doing this from your webinar, or you're doing your webinar from your RV today? Where are you at today?
No, I'm not. I'm at my alma mater, Concordia University in Austin, and I gave a little talk here to some students this morning. And my RV's in the parking lot, but we don't get good Wi-Fi, so that's why I had to come in here and borrow somebody else's office. That's why the phone's ringing.
Okay, great. That
I don't
kind
know
of
who it
falls
is.
in line with our next question. Someone asked, are you open to doing presentations to companies, those types of things? Speaking of,
Yeah, definitely.
okay,
Yeah, I'm actually going to a think tank next month in Atlanta, hosted at UPS with like Disney and a bunch of other companies who are going to be there, kind of having the same conversation. I think is I feel like there's a big problem that a lot of companies are having right now, just from what Christine has shared with me and some other people around. What is this? Something that somebody asked me at the conference a month ago was a guy from Facebook, and he said, "What do you think is the most important part of the hiring process, like the talent acquisition process?" And I said, I feel like it's what you are putting out there into the world, the communication that you're putting out there to attract that initial funnel of people that are coming in. Because if you attract a bad crowd, if you're putting bad messaging out there into the world, then nothing else really matters because you're not being able to work with anything about you. So,
okay.
long story short, yes, love to.
Well, someone's asked about culture. So they said, what about assimilation into culture? This process takes a while. And what do you think companies could be doing to help cast their net wider? I think they're looking at more of an answer for more of a diverse culture or helping people assimilate. So when you
So
went
how to
when
go
you
ahead.
went to these companies, was there anything in particular they did to make you feel more welcomed or part of the company?
Oh, okay, gotcha, totally. Um, so I guess mine would be almost like a speed dating. So if they were able to do that in a day, then they probably had some cool practices on how they helped immerse people into the culture. And one of the things that I would always ask people at their jobs, like, why do you like working here? I also asked them why they didn't like it, but I asked them why they enjoyed it. And almost every time a lot of the times they would say, well, it's the people. It's my team, essentially. That's what makes the difference. That's why I've stuck around. And so to me, gosh, it's kind of it's a really difficult question to say. I would think it doesn't matter what practices. If the people work great and the people treated me and were open to me and accepting, it's almost like being in grade school all over again. If you moved to a new school and kids excluded you and didn't act like you belonged, it sucked. If the companies like Collins or Bob's Clam Pot, where they actually had a big circle in the beginning of the day where they introduced themselves, said a little bit about themselves and things like that, that was huge for me, at least in our experience.
Okay, great.
Title for next new Bob. Is school like high school? Is my job
Yeah.
like high school?
Yeah, that's
Sounds
funny.
like a new sitcom.
Speaking of that, when you were in Gainesville at the scooter shop, did you get to go to a Gator football game?
I did not. I rode our scooter. We rode scooters around town and saw the Tim Tebow statue, but we didn't get to go to a Gator game.
You
Okay,
just
shout
broke her
out to
heart.
my alma mater.
You just broke her heart.
That's awesome.
See what other questions we have going in. Here's another one. Because you weren't getting, you were getting some kind of payment, actually, but people said, were you treated differently because they knew that you were doing this documentary? Did you see
Oh, totally.
differently? Okay.
Yeah. So I mentioned that right off the bat. I knew that companies would treat us differently. And so, there were some bigger companies that, I kind of mentioned this to Christine a couple of weeks ago, that they would kind of bring in like a PR person to the interviews when I would ask the employees questions, and they would kind of sit in the corner and act like they weren't really there, but they were totally monitoring and trying to make sure the employees said good things. And so in those situations, I felt like the interviews were totally more tainted. And so luckily we did close to 100 interviews, so we got some really great ones too that were very authentic, very, like, here's some F-bombs and type stuff, like just good interviews. Not that you need cussing for that, but just kind of to make a point. Anyway, but kind of my thought is it all ties back to that idea that I ended the presentation with was, what are people going to say about you? And so in my eyes, it's like if you have to bring a PR person in because I'm making a documentary, what is any different than that if your employee breaks out his phone and uploads something to YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, whatever? If you're afraid of somebody coming in with a camera, you should be afraid of what your employees can do with their camera. Like, what are you hiding? So to me, that's what I would say to that.
Okay. We just had another question come in. I'm just reading these off the screen. Looking to get your advice on hiring within. You basically have to go through the entire hire process again. How do you expect to retain your current experience of level and reputation while voicing that you are open to other opportunities and positions? So just trying
So
to
how,
decipher.
kind of repeating the question, basically saying like, if you're being hired from within, or you're hiring somebody else from within.
I think they're looking where if you have an employer that's looking to hire with them.
Okay, how do you be open and say like you're open to other opportunities in the company, or?
Yes. How would you
Gotcha.
suggest someone does that successfully?
I've always been a big fan of just being honest. The first time I had my sales meeting we hired a new sales manager at my startup before I left, and our first meeting, the first thing I said to her when I sat down was I didn't like sales. Like that was the first words out of my mouth. I was like, I don't want to be in sales, and she was kind of taken aback by that because she was our sales manager and she was my new boss. Ended up quitting like a month or two later because it wasn't the right fit for me, and so.
Maybe can I just back up? You got hired. So somebody hired you, and then the first day you start, you're like, I really don't like sales to the salesman.
No, this was like 7 months in.
Oh,
Once we hired
oh.
a new manager.
You didn't get hired saying I hate sales. You get.
But I mean, I always went to interviews and they asked me where I wanted to be in 5 years, and I said working for myself. Like you don't. And I know that sounds terrible, but it was the truth at the time. And some of those jobs I didn't get, obviously. But I've always just been a big fan of being honest. Like where do you want to be? If you want to be in another job. I saw people that transferred. And I'm just not a good person to answer this question because I haven't spent a lot of time in a corporate atmosphere. Like, I'd totally not be qualified to answer this question.
Sure. No.
Sorry.
So please go ahead and send us your questions. We're here to answer anything that you have while we have Heath on live. Heath, what would you say? I know you really enjoyed your time at the scooter shop in Gainesville. Don't blame you for that. But what would you say were some of your other favorite jobs that you did that were surprising to you? That when you applied, you thought, I'll just apply for this. But then in the end, when you did the whole day of the job, you really enjoyed it.
That's a good question. Well, actually, I worked at a winery in Minnesota, and they actually were the number one winery ranked by one of their local media people. And it was one of the jobs where I really got to, I was a part of the team for that day. It was like a 10 or 11-hour day. I mean, I poured wine for a lot of customers, starting at the very beginning of the day. Halfway through the day, they pulled me out, made me go pour wine to a wedding that was happening out back. And I'm like, don't I need some type of license for this? I guess not. And then I served cake at the wedding. And to me, it was pretty cool because it was just, I never thought about working at a winery, but I love wine. And to me, it was just one of those jobs I had no idea what was going to happen that day, but it ended up being a really cool day of work, and just the people that we got to meet were really awesome.
Okay. Did you have a chance to give any feedback to any of your employers that you worked with, where you saw something where there was a broken process, or you just felt like something wasn't quite right and you had to speak up?
I've never been asked that question. I'm sure that I did, because I'm a guy who would totally be down to give feedback, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay.
No employers asked you how your experience was?
That's a good
I mean, I'm sure they did, and I would say it was great. Obviously, the lady who fired me didn't ask about my experience. But, yeah. By the way, I had it up there. I didn't have it up on the screen, but if anybody wants to shoot me an email, we can probably share that on the thing. But it's heathdelpadgett@gmail.com. HEATHDELL Padgett@gmail.com.
Great, and we'll be sure to send everyone's contact information out after this webinar, so those that attended will have your connection.
Cool.
So, are you going to do it again?
I don't know. We're planning on doing a tour next fall to screen our film at different companies and universities across the country, and actually got a tentative offer from just interest about going to do a Europe trip, like of Hourly America, or maybe doing something across the country. I don't know if we'll do it, to be honest. I think it'd be cool to travel around the world and do different jobs. We're keeping our options open at this point.
Great. I think we're out of questions and out of time.
Yeah.
I want to close with this one statement, though, that just came in because I really like it. It says, thanks, Heath. Actually, what you said was entirely awesome. Honesty is key. Thank you. Great insights. Thank you, Heath. Thanks from the whole population. We all really appreciate it.
Yeah,
So
thanks for having me.
we get the commitment to get you back on in a couple of months, right?
Sure.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody.
Awesome.
It was so nice talking to everybody and seeing everybody on a podcast. We'll be back on December 17th with Danielle Dilibero. I always get her name last. I've seen Danielle 3 times. She is fantastic at finding purple squirrels of all different kinds of sorts. I call her the Lego lady. So we hope to see you on December 17th. We hope you come back and join us on the 17th too, Heath. And thanks so much for everything.
Sounds good.
Alrighty.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye.